Hi! In this episode I'm going to talk about QGIS files, what they are and what they do, and how you can use them, at least some of them, to bring some clarity to what they are and how they are used. I will start by going through some slides and presentation, and then we will take some practical examples in QGIS. So I will be talking about settings and at different levels. We will talk a lot about the project, QGIS project, because QGIS is centric around projects. There will be a lot of things about styles and how they are handled. And I will also touch on some data formats and differences between data formats in conjunction with the QGIS files. So to start, let's see here. We have settings. So first of all, QGIS is installed on your computer, and all your settings are in your user account. If you don't do anything, you will get a default profile as soon as you open QGIS. That will be generated from default settings inside the installation. So if you have multiple user accounts on a computer, each account will have its own default user profile when you start. And you can change that default profile with the system options in QGIS. And that will regulate how QGIS behaves, how it looks, what menus and so on are active, and some other things. You can have more than one profile in your user account, and you create new profiles inside QGIS. And that is one of the first things you should try when you run into problems in QGIS. See if the problem persists if you work in a clean new profile. If it goes away, then your problem is probably with a third-party plugin or some script settings or something like that. So that is a way to search for the actual problem. QGIS is project-centric, so everything you do is revolving around a project. Even if you haven't saved anything, it will create a temporary project in a temporary folder. That will go away as soon as you close QGIS, but if you save your project, then all your work will be saved inside that project file. And the project settings follow the project. So if you send a project file to someone else, your project settings will follow that project to the receiving installation of QGIS. If there is a conflict between system options and project properties, the project properties will override the system options for that project. But when you open a new project, the system options that you had before would be applied on that project. There's also something called layer properties. They are mostly internal to the project, and they are saved inside the project file. But if you export a layer as an individual asset, you can also export the layer properties in a QGIS layer file or QGIS layer style file. We'll get back to that in the next slide. So we have system options, and that is connected to your profile. And then we have the project file itself, and this is the central part of any work in QGIS, the qgz file. It will contain data sources, but not the actual data. So if you share a project, you have to make sure that the layers that is inside the project is accessible for the person who is opening your project file, either by having it online somewhere or that you also ship the data with the project. So it only contains a pointer towards the data, not the data itself. Except for that, everything the project needs is included in the project file. The styles for the layers, project settings, any created layouts or reports, and some other project resources. The QGZ file is a compressed folder, and it replaced the previous QGIS file. But eventually QGIS evolved to using resources that wasn't suitable to store in the project text file. So they added resource files, and then it was a natural step to compress everything into a QGZ file. So essentially it's just a zipped folder. When you add data to a project, you will only add the geometries and the attribute table, and it will get a generic styling, a simple style. If you haven't defined default styles for different geometry types in your project properties, you can also apply layer styling from a .qml file to a layer you add. There is another way to apply styles, and that is through .qlr-files. The difference is that .qlr-files also have a reference to the data source. Apart from project files, style files, QGIS handles a lot of different file formats. So for instance, layout templates are .qpt, that is print layouts or reports. They can be complete print layouts, or they could be print layout items. QML and QLR have style properties, or more specifically layer properties stored in them. If you want to handle generic styles that are specifically not layer specific, they are just styles. They are handled in XML files. For processing, you can create graphic models, and they are stored in .model3 files. There are also scripting tools, and they are stored in .py files, since they are created using the Python language. So, to repeat, QGIS is project-centric. The QGZ file includes everything except the data. And when you add data, it gets a generic styling, or you can apply a QML file to that data. You can also add a QLR file that will include a reference to the data as well as the styling. Something about geodata. When we talk about geodata, we generally speak about rasters or vector data. In this video, I will mostly refer to vector data, even if some of what I bring up also applies to raster data. I will speak generally about vector data. There are other types of data as well, but this is good for now. When you store data locally, the information can be text-based or binary. Text-based data you can read in a text editor, but binary data you need some form of uncompiler or some form of interpreter for that data. Physically on disk, data is stored in single files or databases. Some formats store data in multiple files and even folders, and we will get some examples of that a bit later. If you don't have data locally, you can add data from our cloud or network services, but that is a bit beyond the scope of this video. So before we get into the examples, if you run into problems, I would recommend you to look at the official documents for QGIS at this URL. It is a great reference when you run into problems, but you can also use it for training. There are lessons on the different topics on this site. So here we have a blank project. I have saved it as a project file, and for the sake of it, I will show you I'm using QGIS 3.26. It really shouldn't matter, but now you know. The project file is stored in a folder, and my operating system has identified it as a compressed folder, so I can open it with an archive manager, and here we have the project file and the resource file or resource database. But QGIS will handle that automatically. We also see that under the project home we have the project file there. To use some data, I will just add the world example data, and by typing world in the coordinate field, and I will export that to a different format. So export, right click and export, save features as, and I will save it as a geopackage in the same folder. Let's call it geopackage. Save. And the layer should have the name world, and I'll add GPKG as well. Like that. A geopackage can contain several layers, so I get the option to not only name the file or the database, I will also get the option to name the layer. And I will also export it as a S3 shapefile, the same location, and call it shapefile. And here I cannot name the layer because a shapefile can only contain one layer. So it will get the layer name from the file name. And remove that one. So let's look at the shapefile and the geopackage in the project folder. So we still have the project folder, or project file, and we have the geopackage database, and then we have the shapefile. And the shapefile is actually several files, and just one of them has the extensions SHP, shapefile. The rest are additional files that are more or less required for it to work. So when you distribute a shapefile, you need to include all of them. One option is to zip all these files. So if I compress it to a zip file, and if we look in the project home here in QGIS, you see the QGIS has identified this zip file as well. So I can expand it and look at the shapefile and add it directly. I don't need to unzip it. There's another option and that is to rename the file from .zip to shz, and QGIS will identify that as a compressed shapefile. This only works if you have one single shapefile inside the package. I'm not sure if you can edit data that is compressed in a shapefile. So if you want to edit data, I think it needs to be uncompressed. However, I will focus on the uncompressed data for the rest of this video, so I'll just leave that here. Let's style this. I will just apply this hashed styling. When I apply a style in the panel here, it will be applied and saved in the project. So if I save this project, close it down and open it again in my folder here, the styling will remain. But I can also, because if I remove this and I add the file again, it will get the generic styling. So if we again apply this style and go into the layer properties by double-clicking or right-click, select properties, go to the symbology tab. We can change the styling here as well, but we can also click on this style button. Here we can save this style as a file. I think there's a shortcut if you right-click the layer and go to styles. No, export, save as QGIS layer style file. You get that dialog we saw previously directly. So in the same folder, let's call this world style. Save it. Okay. And now if we remove that layer and add it again, this shapefile, nothing happens, but I can go into properties and load this style, world style. And get it applied. The other option was to use the qlr-files that will include data as well. So let's export as layer definition file, qlr, and let's call it world with data. Like that, remove it. And here we see the QLR with data. That's a bit misleading because it doesn't contain the actual data, it only contains a reference to the data. But if we add the QLR file from the browser, the style will be automatically applied. We can make this happen for the shapefile as well. And we do that by going to the properties, selecting style, and save as default. What that does is it creates a QML file under the same base name as the shapefile itself. So this will be yet another file that is connected to the shapefiles. And difference being that when you add the shapefile in QGIS, QGIS will look for a QML file with the same base name, and if it finds it, it will apply the styles described in it. So if we remove the style or the layer and add the shapefile this time, the style will be applied automatically. Let's look at the GeoPackage. We will apply the same style to that one and export QGIS layer style file like that. We can do it the same way as we did for the shapefile. I will not do that right now. Another option is to export a layer definition file. It will do the same thing as for the shapefile. I will not do that now either. The difference being that it will, in this QLR file, it will reference this GeoPackage and not the shapefile. So let's go into the properties and press the style button and save as default. Here we will get another option to save the default style to a local database in the computer or in the same database as the data source. This option is not available for all data types, but for GeoPackage it is. So let's select data source database and remove the layer. Go to the browser and look in the GeoPackage package. There we have the world GeoPackage. Add it and it will be applied, the styling. And in the folder, no additional files have been added. So the styling for the world GeoPackage layer is inside the same GeoPackage. So when you are working with layers and styling and so on, you need to know which formats you are using. If it is a format that contains several files or a single file, where is the style saved? Is it in a separate file or is it included inside the database? So there are benefits with the GeoPackage, and if you are sharing your data with persons that don't have QGIS, they will likely be able to access data both in shapefile format and in GeoPackage format. The styling, however, not so much. Another benefit with GeoPackage is that you can actually save the project itself inside the same GeoPackage. So if I remove the shapefile and in project, instead of save or save as, I select save to. I can select the save to GeoPackage. Select the GeoPackage I want to save to and give it a name. Project. So now we have inside the GeoPackage the data and the project. So if we clear everything out and add the project from the GeoPackage, everything works. So the only file I need to distribute if I'm going to send this project to someone is this GeoPackage file. It contains the project, the data, the styling, everything. Let's go back to the presentation. So, to sum things up, QGIS is project-centric. Everything evolves around this qgz-file. It can be a standalone file or included inside a file like GeoPackage. Everything is included in the QGIS file, the project file, except the data itself. But everything else is. If you're handling layers, for QGIS separately. You can handle the layer properties in QML files or in QLR files. The difference being that the QLR files also have a reference to the data source. And in QGIS there are some other files that we have not looked at closely, and they are for layout templates, generic styles, processing models and scripting tools. There may be some additional files that I haven't brought up as well. Hopefully this will bring some clarity to how QGIS is working with files in different ways and what you need to think about when you share projects with others. I see you next time.